I have an advantage over everyone else, of course, because I know in advance what I'm going to be preaching. And for a long time, I've been thinking about these two simple sentences. And I'm asking you, please, for the next several weeks, these two simple sentences, would you please think about these sentences, these statements of truth, over and over for the next several weeks? Noah built an ark. He also built an altar. And in Genesis chapter 6, chapter 7, chapter 8, chapter 9, we see many details about the life of Noah and what he did. We see how he worked with animals. We see how he worked with construction. We see how he was the very first person in the Bible that we read about who planted a vineyard. So for the next several weeks, please join me in reading those chapters, not just a single verse, but chapters 6, 7, 8, and 9. Please join me in reading and rereading and thinking about these statements again and again. Noah built an ark. He also built an altar. What are you building today? Every one of us is building something. What character traits are you building today? What physical things are you building today? Every one of us is a builder. How are you spending the hours of your day? What are you thinking about? What are the details that are important to you? When we see Noah in these 4 chapters, we can see that Noah followed God's plan. We can see that Noah fulfilled God's purpose. We can see that Noah experienced God's protection. And we also see that Noah, of course, worshiped God. It was a dark time in the Old Testament. It was a dark time in humanity. In fact, it was so dark that it's almost beyond our comprehension. We see the news lines, the headlines in our own newspapers today, and we know that in different places things are bad. But as we read chapter 6 in Genesis, things had come to a place that they were so bad that God was making the decision that he was going to eliminate all of the life off of the earth, that there would only be a few people who would be rescued. So when Noah took these actions, when Noah built an ark, and when he also built an altar, this was in the midst of some very, very difficult times. Again, if you just pause and think in your own life, how does that apply for you literally today? What circumstances are you facing? What situations surround you? What pressures are you experiencing? As we think for the next 4 weeks, again and again, about these simple statements, today, let's look at Genesis chapter 6, verses 14a. God said to Noah, "Make yourself an ark of gopher wood." That was the plan. Now, there were more details. That's where it's very important to read chapter 6, all of chapter 6. We can see the description of the ark. We can see the arrangement of the decks. We can see the width, the length, the height of the ark. As we go on, we can see the preparations that are to take place. And then as we go into chapter 7, verse 1, the Lord said to Noah, "Go into the ark, you and all your household, for I have seen that you are righteous before me in this generation." And then as we go to Genesis chapter 8, verse 20, we read the words, "Then Noah built an altar to the Lord and took some of every clean animal and some of every clean bird and offered burnt offerings on the altar." Noah built an ark. he also built an altar. Now, there's a word of caution. It's repeated throughout the Old Testament. And in the next 3 to 4 weeks, we need to take an honest look at our own lives. Noah built an ark. He also built an altar. And as we read chapter 6, 7, 8, and 9, we also see that unfortunately, Noah was prone to his own self-defeating actions and practices. That's a sad truth, but it's a somber reminder for all of us throughout the Old Testament into the New Testament repeatedly. Ironically, it's one of the strengths of the Bible. One of the strengths of the Bible is that the truth is shown both positively in what the people did and also negatively in what they did. In other words, if you and I were just going to create something out of fiction, if this was the good guy without exception would always be good. The story would always win on the high point of his great successes. And the bad guys would always be bad guys. They would have the chance to do something good, but they would repeatedly choose just to do bad. But in the Bible, there's this amazing balance because it is a reflection of truth that while you and I have the tremendous capability and opportunity to do good things, we can also realize that in our own lives, we have self-defeating practices. Point number 1, Noah followed God's plan. What is your aspiration today? What is it that you really, really want to do? What is it that just quietly between you and the Lord, you say, this is what I want to do? You see, God told Noah to build an ark, but Noah could have said, well, that's a nice project, but that's really not what I want to do. I really want to do something else instead. In your heart of hearts today, what do you want to do? God has a plan for your life. God has a plan for my life. But he gives us a choice. He gives us a choice to follow his plan for our lives, or we can go off and choose other plans. They're not necessarily bad. They're not the most terrible thing in the world. But there's a difference between simply following my own plan and following God's plan. What's your aspiration this year? We're on the brink of a brand new year. Noah followed God's plan. When God said, build the ark, it needs to be these dimensions, gather these members of your family, get these things together as provisions, bring into the ark these animals. Noah followed God's plan. Are you following God's plan? Am I following God's plan in my life? He built an ark. What is it that I'm building this year? I want to build God's church. And I know that many of you are the same. I know that you want to build God's church. I want to show God's love to other people who need to experience God's love. I'm grateful. I think about all the people in my life who showed God's love to me. And I think you're like me. You want to show God's love to other people. God has a plan for me. God has a plan for you. God has a plan for the world. But he still gives us the choice. What is your personal aspiration? Do you want to join God in his plan for your own personal life? And as you fulfill that plan, as you follow that plan that God has for your life, it will have an impact. It will have an impact on others. The opposite side of the story is also true. If you don't follow God's plan, that's going to have an impact as well. But I want to follow God's plan. Don't you? I want to build up God's church. Don't you? I know that other people have showed God's love to me. I want to be the kind of person who shows God's love to other people. Don't you? And then what's the object of your ultimate adoration? He built an ark, but he also built an altar. As we think about these things for the next several weeks, we're at the very beginning of a brand new year. What are you going to build? What are you going to worship? How are you going to demonstrate what worshiping God means? May we read God's scripture. May we look at the example that we see in the life of Noah. May we be honest with our own strengths, with our own weaknesses. May we be willing to take an assessment of where we are prone to self-defeating practices. And may we be the kind of people that say, yes, God, we want to follow your plans for our life. Daniel, once more, please continue to lead us today.
Oops.